I wish every business owner would watch this video till the end because the skill I'm about to teach you is the exact reason I was able to sell my business for $46.2 million. And that skill is leading change. So here's what I'm gonna go over. What is change? How do we manage change at work? What stops people from changing? And how do you help your team change? And for those of you who don't know me, my name is Layla Hormozi. I'm the CEO of Acquisition.com, where I run a $500 million portfolio, and our mission is to make real business education available to everybody. So by the end of our time together, what I promise is that you will understand what stops change, how to prevent that, and how to help others change so that you can achieve your goals and scale your business. So since the age of 24, I've taken home about $1.2 million per month on average. I've sold over 3,000 fitness programs, serviced over 7,500 high-ticket B2B customers, provided supplements to over 400,000 customers, and personally built, scaled, and sold 3 businesses, Gym Launch, Prestige Labs, and Allen, which was service, e-commerce, and software. And that led to where we are now, which is where I take minority in businesses above 10 million in revenue at Acquisition.com. So what is change? Change is to make something different. So change is neutral. People label it as good or bad. But in general, change is just making something different. The only constant that we have in business and in life is change. Everything's gonna change. Technology, people, services, customers, marketplaces, organizational structure. So like all of these things absolutely will change in your business. And we have to be prepared for when these things change, whether we want them to or not, how do we react to that situation? A leader's job is to integrate change into the work that your people produce. So your job is not to protect people from change. Your job is to make it easier for your team to change. Make it easier than it is hard for your team to change. That is your job. Oftentimes what happens is that people step into a leadership or management position and they actually make people's lives harder. They make change harder for people because of the things they put in place, the process, the systems, the rules. When in reality, why does a manager exist? If you have a group of people, why is there a manager at the top? The goal is that that person can make every single person below them that much more efficient and that they can make their lives and their jobs that much easier so that it can spread and disseminate the work more efficiently. But unfortunately, this is easier said than done. A long time ago, when we had Gym Launch, right? That was my first company. We had gone from 0 to 40 million in about 3 years. And I was, I think, 26, 27 at the time. You know, the reason that we were able to go from 0 to 40 million was, in my opinion, one thing, which is we had this really unique ability to get customers really cheap for gyms and to get gym owners as our clients very cheaply. Now, you could say Alex and Layla had been in the fitness industry for a long time. You could say that we were launching gyms for years before we did this. You could say that we were a complementary, partnership. You could say that we brought in these great teammates. There's all these things. But fundamentally, the economics of the business, there was an arbitrage that was in our favor. This is similar to when people are first to market, which essentially we were. We kind of created our own market. And so because of that, we had over 2,000 success stories within the first, I want to say it was about 18 months. It was absolutely bananas. But one day things changed. Many of you who are business owners might have heard of the Facebook slap. I was ignorant to what that was until it happened, which was all of a sudden, every single customer that we had started saying, what's going on? The cost of advertising is going up. My leads that were, we were getting people dollar leads. All of a sudden they're getting $6, $7. Some people are even doing $15, $20 leads. And I was like, holy crap, I don't know what's going on. So what I realized after time and time again of essentially us trying to build new funnels, new ads, doing all these different things, like basically trying to hit the problem with the hammer over and over and over again, which was like, let's make new ads, let's make different ads, let's make all these different things, right? Let's try a different target audience. And what we realized is that we kept getting the same results. Like we just were not getting lower than like $4 a lead. And that is quadruple what they were used to. This is the funny thing. Even though that is actually a very good cost of acquisition, it was so high relative to what they were used to, it was like an outrage. And all of our customers were very upset. And so clearly something needed to change. The things that we were doing no longer resulted in the results that we wanted for ourselves or our customers. But rather than being on board and excited about this change, what I saw immediately when I told my team that we needed to make some radical changes is I saw fear. What if it changes back quickly and we have to change again? We don't have the right resources. We're gonna need new people. We're gonna need a whole new team. That sounds impossible. It's never been done before. There's no way we can go back to what it was. What am I gonna do about this person, about this person, about this person? What about that department? What about this department? So what happened in that moment changed the company forever, which was essentially I saw from the leadership team I had, half of the people on the leadership team charged towards the new direction, understanding that there was just fundamentally no way this business could move forward without completely changing how we did business. And then half of my team cowered in fear, if I'm really honest. They were terrified of what was happening. They were terrified of what they were going to have to do as a result, how they were going to have to change their teams, the skills they were going to have to acquire. And so they resisted the change. Half of my leaders ended up leaving, right? And a lot of it was mutual. It was like we had the discussions and I was like, here's what's gonna need to happen. And I did my best to guide them through it, but at the end of the day, a lot of them refused. I had one person outright say, I will not fire somebody on my team just because you want to change the direction of the company. And I said, I don't want to change the direction of the company, but I know that I have to change the direction of the company to make sure that we actually have a company. And this was something that she could not understand. And it was really, really tough because essentially that half of that team refused to make the hard decisions that we needed to save the company. That was what it was. We had to take a company that was built off arbitrage and turn it into a company that had no arbitrage in its favor. We had to redo our offerings. We had to redo our marketing. We had to redo how we sell, who we sell, what kind of customers we service, and our product. We had to redo everything, not because it was bad, but because times had changed, circumstances had changed. Now, for a gym to get customers and for us to get customers, there's just no way it's ever going to get the return it ever did. And therefore, you have to figure out how to get those returns by doing other things in the business, by changing other things like the product, the stack, the packaging. Based on that, what do we know for sure about change? One, it happens pretty much every day. And I'm sure that you guys could say, like, in your business, things that happened yesterday, things happen differently today. And things are probably gonna be different tomorrow too. It's also a necessary part of business growth. I can't tell you how many times people come up to me and ask me the question of like, I have this business, I've been doing this for 3 years, but now this thing isn't working. It's like, yes, that is feedback from an external source to tell you that you need to change direction. If the thing that you've always been doing isn't working anymore, it's not resulting in the same result it was 3 years ago, then we want to look at what we need to change. Third, sometimes we don't want the change, even though we know it's for the best. I can tell you that when I realized that I needed to fundamentally change the entire business, I had a moment where I was like, I don't know if I want to do this. I even told Alex, I was like, half the leadership team is going to leave. I know it because I know them as people. They've been here for 3 years and I know they're not going to want to do this stuff. The teams below them, because of them churning out, I'm going to have so much churn in those teams. And we still have to redo half the departments anyways. I remember I talked to one of my friends and I think I basically complained for like an hour to her. I just this is going to be so much fucking work. And I remember she looked at me and she was like, but you're going to do it. And I was like, yeah. I am, because I know it's what's best. I didn't want to do it, but I knew it was what was best. Which leads me to my next point, which is change is often easier than it seems because we make up this huge catastrophe. We catastrophize change in our minds of how terrible it's going to be and all the worst case scenarios of what are going to happen with people and places and things and the business and what if it doesn't work and it explodes and then I'm poor and I'm homeless. And we go to these dark places in our minds thinking like this one thing that we're going to change is going to ruin everything. And that brings me to the next point, which is what makes change hard is the fact that we resist it naturally. One, that's normal. Two, we don't have to do that and we can train ourselves out of it. And here's the thing, nobody and no company was ever remembered for doing what was always done. Think about companies that you know of. Did they just do what everybody else did? Or did they do something new and different and unheard of that many people would have said could have failed? The question really is, how do we manage change? We manage change by understanding it's not the change itself, it's how we think about the change. Logically, we know that change is constant and necessary, but emotionally, we want predictability. And what change does is it robs humans of being able to predict what tomorrow brings. So why do people resist the change? Because now all of a sudden you have taken away certainty of future. And now it's like scrambled eggs in their brains. It's like, oh my God, what does tomorrow bring? What does the future look like? And often a lot of people prioritize predictability over advancement. And so they will try to cling to the past to ensure themselves predictability. Here's the thing, uncomfortable thoughts that lead to feeling like there's a sense of unpredictability and emotions are not a reason to avoid change, right? It's quite the opposite. Instead, what we want to do is follow the framework of evidence over emotions, okay? So when we're looking at change and we're saying, for example, the story that I was telling you about gym launch, the evidence was insurmountable. There was literally every department was pointing towards there is a strategic issue in the business, right? Like no tactics, no execution was fixing what we were doing. We were giving 11 out of 10 effort in every department and it wasn't working. What does it tell me when 11 out of 10 is being given in every department, but the business is not growing? It tells me that it's a strategic issue, right? And we have to change our strategy, which changes everything. So in that time, though I didn't want to change because I was scared. What is this business going to look like? What if it fails? We have all these people relying on us. I have hundreds of employees. But I knew that the evidence I could not refute. And so we have to base our reasons for change and our actions off of facts rather than how we feel. Here's the thing. Uncertainty that we feel is not influenced by the circumstance, but by our thoughts and how much validity we give to unsubstantiated thoughts. How do you believe that every thought you have about change is true? Oftentimes, I talk to business owners and it's like, and trust me, I was here too. It's like, well, I'm worried that if I do this, this will happen, and this will happen, and this will happen. And I'm like, that's totally normal to have all of those thoughts. And it's also very unlikely that these things will happen. A lot of the times what I have people do is I have them write their thoughts down, then I say, on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being not likely at all, 10 being incredibly likely, probably happening tomorrow, how likely do you think this thought is to be true? And then when people write them down, they're like, most things are like between a 1 and a 3, right? It's like we're thinking edge case. And so what we have to understand is that as business owners and as people who are trying to build a better future and achieve goals, thoughts often deter people from their goals because they believe that all of the thoughts they have are true. And in order to achieve our goals and to make the changes necessary to build our businesses, to build better marriages, bodies, whatever it may be, right? You're watching this probably for business. Then we have to understand that the thoughts that we have in our head, we should not believe every thought that pops up. It does not mean that it's true. And what if we could just acknowledge it and say, makes sense. Makes sense I would be terrified to make this change. Makes sense that I would think all of these terrible things. Doesn't mean I shouldn't do it. Doesn't mean it's going to happen. Just because I think it doesn't mean it's a prediction of the future. And so that means if thoughts are not a prediction of the future, that stability is an inside job. You don't get stability from outside circumstances. You don't need to have stability in your environment, in the marketplace, in your job, because here's the thing, most stability is an illusion. And you probably know this as a business owner, which is like, you think there's some people who will ask you questions. And I know I've had employees at points who have been like, just like want to hear that I'm never going to lose my job. And I'll say, I'm like, I can never tell you that you're never going to lose your job because that would be a lie. How the fuck do I not know? It's like a hurricane could hit tomorrow and wipe out our building and there could be a catastrophic war that goes on and like all the businesses shut down. Like, I have no idea. There's so many things that I can't control. And that's the thing, is that we can't control everything in our circumstances. We can't control everything in our environment when change is occurring in our business. But we can control how we react to it. And so we must master our management in order to disseminate it down to our teams. If we can master how we manage change and how we react to it, then we can absolutely master how our teams do. Because guess what? Your teams, the first thing you do when you present a change is they're gonna say, what's their tonality? What's their facial expressions? Do they think this is good or bad? They're looking to you to tell them how to act. So here's a question. Do you encourage your team to think more thoughts that create stability during change? Or do you influence them to think thoughts that create more ambiguity? We manage change by not acting upon our thoughts and emotions that run rampant before we understand. Which brings me to, what stops change, right? We understand how to manage it. We have to manage our minds. We have to manage our inside world and how we react to it, right? But what stops people from changing? What stops organizations from moving forward and achieving their goals? Because that's really what this is. Resistance. That's what stops change, okay? What is resistance? It's arguing with what is. A lot of people argue with an obvious change. They argue with facts. They argue with irrefutable evidence because it's so scary to think that tomorrow could be completely unpredictable. That's fair. It's completely fair. But if we are aware of it, then we can make sure that we mitigate it. So what often happens is change occurs. And then there's a heavy period of resistance. And then once we get past the resistance, now we can move on to solutioning. It could be that there's feedback, that signals change. Resist. And until we get through resistance, we can't get to solution. It could be that we get new information. So it could be that you started a business and you got new information about your marketplace and you're like, holy shit, this is not a good business. And you could resist that for years. I see people who stick with a bad decision and a bad market and a bad business for 5 to 7 years before they say, you know what, I'm gonna find a solution to this. And so the more time that we spend resisting, the less time we spend solving. And so every moment that you resist change, you steal that moment from yourself, you steal that energy from yourself to give yourself that energy to solve the situation. So the more time we spend resisting, the less time we have to solve, right? So it's like you're spending all this time, this energy resisting the change, thinking about all the catastrophe, like indulging in the fear, when you could take that energy and just say, I'm gonna focus on, you know what acceptance is? It's cutting off the alternative. It's saying, I'm not allowed to focus on the fear because I am dedicating myself to this new direction and I'm just gonna focus on moving forward. And I really think that's what acceptance is. It's showing with our behavior and our actions that we're not going to indulge in the past, we're just going to focus on a new future. And so if we can decrease resistance, we can increase opportunities for our businesses and the people that work with us. I think that often fear comes from focusing on what we have to lose, while hope comes from focusing on what we could become. And a lot of people, if they focus on the past, they stay in a place of fear. But if they focus on the future of the possibility of what could become, then they feel hopeful. And your job as a leader is to always move people into a place of hope, which you can absolutely do with painting a very vivid vision of the future and making people aware of how change affects us, just like I am right now. Because what you focus on, whether conscious or not, is absolutely what your team will focus on. So if you are constantly catastrophizing about this change, indulging in the fear of like this change that you have in your business, oh my God, we've got to switch platforms because we got shut down on Instagram and now we've got to move over to TikTok, and like, what if it doesn't work? And you start being nervous on calls and showing up like this to your team. You know what you're doing is you're disseminating fear down to everybody else in your team. And do you think that people who are indulging in fear are going to be able to achieve big goals? Are they going to be able to facilitate change? No, because fear creates resistance, and resistance stops change. Resistance is a normal part of change, okay? Becoming aware of how you and your team resist is your job as a leader. What I like to say is you are response-able for your team. What does response-able mean? Yes, it's cheesy, but like our responses are always available for us to choose. We are not defaulted into any response from any other reason, right? Like we get to choose how we respond to a situation. Nothing makes us feel or do anything, right? Oftentimes we do that by focusing on the past, right? Focusing on what we could lose. And despite circumstance, our behavior is up to us. No matter what has happened, maybe it's COVID, maybe the marketplace has changed, maybe AI is putting you out of business. Despite any of those circumstances, how you behave and what you do next in front of your whole team while they're watching is completely up to you. And so resistance is actually a choice. Why? Because it requires active focus on the past. It's not passive. You're not accidentally thinking about the past. You are choosing not to make it harder to focus on the past than easier to focus on the future. As a leader, our response is most impactful to how everyone else is going to do that. At the end of the day, if you choose to continue to relive the past, indulge in the past, wonder why it's not like it was in the past, your team will do the same. And so the question becomes, how do we help our teams manage that change? So I picked this model up from one of my friends. Her name is Brooke, and she has what you call the thought model. And I think I discovered it like 7 years ago, and I still use it because I think it's a great model. There's probably like 10 different ways that you could display this and you could walk it through, but essentially it's part of like behavioral psychology. And so the thought model is that there's a circumstance, right? And the circumstance leads to a thought. That thought leads to a feeling. That feeling leads to a behavior, and that behavior leads to the results you have in your life. Let me give you some examples. So change is a circumstance. You have a circumstance of some kind of change, right? Let's say that it's Facebook shut me down and now I've got to move platforms for my business, right? And everything's under Facebook. I have people who know how to do Facebook. I don't know anyone who knows how to do TikTok. Like I'm gonna have to get all new teammates. The next thing you have is you have a thought, and your thought is, this is hard. And you focus on that thought. And the more you focus on that thought, the more you start to feel helpless. And then because you feel helpless, and you have not diffused yourself from a feeling to an action, you shut down, you complain, and then you get the result of things continuing to be hard and not work. Let's give another one, an alternative circumstance. Same circumstance, let's say, but say that you have the circumstance and you have the thought, this is hard. Now I'm not saying it's good or bad, but it's hard. But because you have that thought, you then think, this is hard, but I can do it. And you feel motivated. So you have the thought, this is hard, but I can do that. How cool would that be? I feel motivated. And then what you do is you double down on making the new thing work. You double down on TikTok, you double down on LinkedIn, you double down on cold outbound, whatever it may be. And then the result is that you show yourself that change is possible. Last example, circumstance. Again, Facebook shuts you down. First thought, I can learn new things. What does that thought of I learn new things then make you feel? Makes you feel hopeful. Like there's a brighter future. Wow, I get to acquire a new skill. This is really cool. A lot of people don't do this. And then because you feel hopeful, you listen, you engage, and you practice, and you learn the new thing, which then drives you to the result of learning the new thing and having the result you want in your business. And so what you see from this model is that there's really two places, in my opinion, and through all of my studying of psychology, of where intervention takes place. And from what I've seen, the two places where intervention makes the most sense is at the place of the thought or at the place of behavior. Now, my personal favorite is behavior, but I will talk about both alternatives because I think you just gotta figure out what works for you. So we're gonna walk through the thought model with how you would do this with a resistant teammate, somebody who doesn't want to follow out a change, somebody who doesn't like the new direction of the business, somebody who doesn't want to do the thing you're asking them to do. And we're gonna identify right? The thought and the behavior. Then what you can do is you can use that to put in intervention tools to help facilitate change. So the next time you have to roll something out in your company, you can give this video to your team, for one, have them watch it so they understand, and then help them with the intervention. Let's say that we've got an intervention at B, which is behavior. So the first piece is we want to identify what actions of this person cause the unwanted result. Say we've got a cat. The cat is scratching the couch, right? And so the unwanted behavior is that the cat keeps scratching the damn couch. The second thing we want to do is, now that we've identified what the unwanted behavior is, let's determine the closest point of latency to interfere, and we will create a cue. Latency means the shortest period of time between the behavior and the thing. And so what we realize is that the cat is scratching the leg of the couch, right? And so if we want to interfere with the behavior, we should interfere with the cat interacting with the leg of the couch, not the entire couch. The next piece is we want to swap the old behavior for a new one. How do we do that? Well, what if we put a scratch pad on the leg of the couch? And then when the cat scratches the scratch pad instead of the couch, we reinforce that new behavior. And eventually what you can do is you can move that scratch pad away from the couch after the cat has scratched enough times, and it will start to scratch the scratch pad and not the couch. This is also good if you actually have a cat, which I don't. Okay, so what we're doing here is we're identifying the behavior we don't want, and then we're seeing where we can interfere. Another example of this, if you have somebody who, for example, is overweight, right? And you're like, oh, I don't know why they keep overeating. Okay, well, what do they do right before they overeat, right? The closest point of interference. They open the refrigerator because it's always ice cream. Could we put a note there? Could we put a lock there? How could we put just a little bit of either resistance or an alternative to create a lag trying to do the behavior and the behavior occurring? And so the same goes for teammate. If you have a teammate that's doing an unwanted behavior, we want to figure out the exact thing that happens right before the behavior occurs or right where the behavior is occurring. And then we want to try to trade it for a different behavior. And so the easiest way to change an old behavior is to focus more on what to do in relation to what happens next. And so there's little time to think of what's lost. So for example, if you have a teammate that, say you're changing direction and you realize that you need to move from being a D2C company to a B2B company. Say you've built a software and you've started to realize you're like, holy crap, I think we serve enterprise customers. We don't serve direct to consumer. And I think we have to reorganize this whole software. And say you have a teammate that time and time again, even though they're the head of product, they continue to deliver you specs where the specs are all for D2C. So they're like for direct consumer software. And you're like, no, we're moving to enterprise, but like all the features that they're building are built in a way that only makes sense for direct to consumer software. This does not make sense anymore. And so what do you want to do is you probably want to find out what that person does. You want to interfere by interfering with them right before they start to build out the spec. And so it could be something like a reminder, or it could be something like interference, or it could be something like a cue so that they focus on the new thing rather than getting rid of the old thing, right? And so like an easy one for this might be literally a cue of having a sticky note on the computer that says focus on B2B enterprise. B2B enterprise customer. B2B enterprise customer is king. And if you just have that sticky note on your computer, it's like, okay, it has interfered with the behavior. It has reminded me of where I want to go and what I want to focus on rather than what I don't want to focus on. So if you're again going to try and get someone to change their behavior, again, like the cat, it's not like I told them get off the couch and I tried to spray them and deter them and hit them when they went to the couch. We just put something new in place. So it's more convenient to scratch the scratch pad than to go to the couch. And so if we distract somebody from the thing we don't want them to do, they're much more likely to do the thing we want them to do, that we have used as a distraction tool. So that's the first place we can interfere to help people change, is at their behavior. The second place that we can help people change is intervention at the thought, because there are going to be some people where they might be doing the behavior, but they're also saying, you know, I feel this certain way, or I'm thinking these thoughts. And so if we're intervening at the thought line, then we want to, one, identify what thoughts are causing the resistance. And so it might be, I don't want to change because it changes my job, and what if they fire me? That's the thought. Because I can tell you, like a lot of the times when your team doesn't want to change, it's because like you just follow this all around the end of the day, it's like, I'm gonna get fucking fired. That's what it is. That's like always the worst case fear. Now, we label the thought for what it is, right? That's catastrophic thinking. Thoughts are not reality. Thoughts are just sentences in our mind. And so in this instance, I would tell somebody that sounds like a catastrophic thought. Like, how likely do you think that is that that's going to occur based on everything that's happening and based on what I'm saying right now, which is I'm not firing you. And then you have that person rate it. You have them identify what kind of thought it is. It's not a true thought. It's a catastrophic thought. It's a lie, right? It's just a sentence in my brain that could also be completely false and made up. And so then once you've identified that thought, you want to trade it for a new one. Now, here's the thing. I'm not a fan of like the hippy dippy talk yourself into like, I'm fucking Tony Robbins and the king of the world bullshit. Because if you trade that thought for one that is also equally unbelievable in the opposite direction, you're probably not gonna stick there either. And so instead, you wanna trade the thought for a new believable thought. One that you can, it's a little challenging, but it's logical. So it's like, this will be hard, but I am up for the challenge and I can learn new things in my job. That is a very healthy thought to have in that situation. It is also probably true. And then what you want to do is, now that you've established and gone through this thought process with that person, you then figure out if you want them to act in accordance with the productive thought, you would have them immediately start a new behavior that reinforces that thought. And so maybe they start reading a book, or you buy them a course on this new thing that they need to learn. For somebody who's scared of something, say somebody's scared of a spider, it's like you would probably have them, like go in the same room as a spider. Like there's all sorts of things, but basically what you want to do is, now that they have this new thought that they've agreed to, you reinforce the thought with a behavior. And so when we want to break a behavior, we want to break the relationship between the thought and the behavior. When we're trying to change it and we're trying to get rid of it. When we're trying to create a new one, we want to fuse them together. So we want to do the thing as quickly as possible after the thought. And so it's just equal opposites. What this means is only a leader can make the difference between a team that is constantly excited for a new challenge and a team who cowers and resists a new challenge. So the question is, where do you see a teammate struggling with change? So what I want you to do from watching this video is, I want you to think, what things have I resisted in my business? What change have I resisted? What change is factually correct and probably needs to happen, but I have continued to resist it because of my fear? And I want you to write that down, and I want you to actually even use that model to address the change with yourself. Because it might be that the reason that you haven't changed is because it has to start with you before you can help your team do this. Become self-aware of where you're at in this process. Understand that in order to change an organization's strategy, you must change the mindset and the behavior of all the people underneath of it. And that is usually the hardest part of business. And so I hope this video helped you. If it did, let me know, leave a comment below.